First story, The Night the Barracks Forgot. I never believed in hauntings. I believed in duty, in checklist lights, and the clack of boots on concrete. My name is Jack Mercer, born in a small town outside Columbus, and I was on my third tour guarding the motor pool at Fort Mercer when the night started to slip. It began as one of those cold, hungry midnights, fog like wool rolling over the tarmac, radio static like a faraway choir. We were three on post that watch, me, Luis, and Harper. We joked, we smoked, we kept watch. At exactly midnight, the power hiccuped, not a full blackout, just the lights breathing wrong. Harper said he saw movement behind the fuel truck. I laughed, but his laugh died at like someone shutting a door. We checked the cameras. The feeds were a smear of ash. Then Luis disappeared. We found nothing at first. No footprints in the mud, no blood, no sign, and the roster still showed his name. But his locker was empty, his dog tags gone. We called command. They told us to stay put. They told us to be reasonable. The last words over the line were thin, politeness like a paper shield. We were alone. The hours stretched, elastic and cruel. Whispering came from the supply bay, not wind, but voices flattened, like pages rubbed together. I saw shapes at the edge of the floodlights, corners of things that did not belong to the world. Once, I looked up and the mess hall was full of people who were not there. Faces glowered at me from behind glass, mouths moving soundless. I wanted to run. I could not move. We wrote names on a chalkboard, just in case. I wrote mine. I wrote Luis's. I wrote Harper's. The chalk smelled of rain and something older like bone dust. When dawn crawled, the chalkboard was smeared. Luis's name had lost letters as if an eraser had breathed over it. He was still on the roster, still on the manifest, but he was not a man anymore. He was the hollow where a man used to be. We tried to leave. The gate lights flared and then went dead. On the radio, static shaped itself into a cadence. Our unit number called back to us by a voice that wore its own name like a mask. It said the names of our mothers, the street addresses we had given at 20. It knew things we had never told anyone. It learned us. Harper started talking backwards in his sleep. He woke and did not remember speaking. He clawed at his throat and pointed to the watchtower. I climbed the ladder because I could not help myself. At the top, the night held its breath. The silhouettes in the field were not men. They were recollections, shadows stitched from cigarette smoke and shout, clamoring for a place in memory. They wanted to be named. In the end, we did what soldiers do. We kept watch. We counted heads until counting stopped meaning anything. The base log remained neat, official, typed lines and signatures like vows. But the chalk erased, names unstitched from the list. Men grew thin around the edges like photographs left in sun. The last thing I remember is writing my name on the board and watching the letters twitch. Then there was a kindness, a pressure, as if someone pressed a palm against my back and folded me inward. I heard my own voice call the roll from somewhere far away. It read my name and then said nothing else. I understood, in some terrible glass-splintered clarity, that we were never meant to be kept here as we were. We were being filed away. If you ever pass Fort Mercer in the fog, look at the barriers. You might see traffic lights breathing. You might see men in the windows who do not move. You might think it is empty. You would be wrong. They remember us until they forget us. I write this now with hands that are not entirely mine, and I do not know which part of me will stay when the letters go. I only know this: when the barracks forget, the night keeps the names, and the night does not return them. Second story, The Blood Set 16. They put me on the ridge because I said I could take the cold, because I said I would watch when the others slept. My name is Jackson Hale, and the base is called Fort Ashford, small, forgotten, tucked into a hollow where the road becomes rumor. We were a skeleton crew, broken by rotations and whispers. Corporal Miller told stories at night about home. Lieutenant Reyes wrote letters that never left his pocket. I kept the logs, the quiet, the flashlight that never quite cut the dark. The first night was ordinary. Wind, the scrape of chains, the soft radio hiss. I walked the perimeter with my rifle like a prayer. I remember the way the moon threw the sentry posts into black teeth. And then I heard something that was not a human sound. A scraping that started like a fingernail on glass and grew into a chorus of small, wet claps. I froze. The hair along my neck rose. I felt very small. I saw it before I knew what to name it. It moved like a shadow that had learned to breathe, long limbs that folded and unfolded with ridiculous joints, a throat that swallowed the moon. It did not run toward me. It examined the wire, the fence, the rusted emblem of our unit. When it turned, it had no face, only the suggestion of one, and I understood at once that it found me interesting. I called it in on the radio and heard my own voice crack. Miller laughed once, a brittle thing, then silence. The feeds from the bunkers showed nothing but static. Someone finally clicked on the floodlight, and for a second, the creature recoiled, like a blind thing exposed to light. It hissed, and the sound made the hair stand up on my arms. I felt my hands tremble. I fired. The rifle barked, the rounds cut air. The creature did not fall. It bent, almost lovingly, picking through the air where the bullets had been, then touched one of the spent shells and turned its head as if tasting metal. I kept firing until my chest burned and the magazine was empty. I dropped the rifle and ran toward the gate, toward the warm smear of barracks. They thought the alarms would bring safety. They thought walls meant anything. They did not understand that this thing did not break doors. It invited itself. It learned to imitate our voices, our footsteps, the tick of our watches. It called for Corporal Miller in a whisper that sounded exactly like the corporal. It answered like Lieutenant Reyes when the lieutenant did not answer. I heard doors open where no hand had touched a knob. I watched men follow phantom orders into the dark. One by one, they vanished. I remember running into the mess hall and finding the lieutenant sitting at his table, staring into a bowl of cold stew. His eyes were wrong. Too still. He smiled at me with that smile that did not reach anything behind his face. He said, "We have duty, Jackson." I felt my stomach turn. There was nothing left of him. I tried to leave the base the next dawn. The gate was a suggestion. The road warped. Tires had been left imprinted in mud that walked away like footprints of a departing animal. My radio filled with laughter that was not any of us. I hid in the generator room and watched the cameras feed me images of empty corridors where shadows moved as if remembering how to be men. Days bled. Food ran thin. Sleep turned into a rust-colored descent where something touched the edges of my dreams and tasted them. I wrote in the logbook with a shaky hand, "Do not answer the voice. Do not follow." But I wrote it in my own hand, and after a while, the letters rearranged themselves on the page. They formed small messages I had not meant. Come, sit, sleep. On the last night, I saw my reflection in a window, my eyes hollow, my jaw sunken. Behind me, in the wash of light from the control room, the thing unfolded into a human outline and smiled with all the wrong teeth. It raised a hand and began to wave the way a man waves when he is telling you to come home. I felt my feet obey. I do not know how long I have been doing this. Sometimes I wake and the log is warm under my hand, and my pen has written names I do not remember. Sometimes I look out, and the hollow is full of small moving shapes that sing like chains. They call me by my name and ask me if I am cold. I give them the blanket. I tell them stories about the road. I watch the road for headlights that will not come. If you find this, do not answer the call. Do not trust the voice that sounds like a friend. Do not come to Fort Ashford. I am writing to you, but I am not sure my hand is my own. I remember the light, bright, hot, like a forgotten sun, and the way it made everything stop and whisper. Listen, sometimes late, I hear a new voice on the radio that is not mine, and it says, "We are ready." And I answer. Third story, The Hollow Beyond the Wire. I was posted at Fort Brantley when the drills stopped. Nights were generators and distant radios. Then one night the sound cut out and the silence pressed like an animal against glass. I told myself it was fatigue, but my hands would not stop shaking. My name is Marcus Hale. I had signed for a routine tour, a quiet rotation behind razor wire in Texas. We were 24 men. The sergeant, Tomlinson, tapped his cigarette like a metronome. The night he stopped tapping, everything shifted. It began at the perimeter. The sensors blinked and then blinked no more. The dogs went mute. On patrol, I found prints in the mud with no toes, smears like palms dragged through earth. The radio answered with static, then a distant beating, low, slow, like a drum underwater. We cleared the compound and found bunkers empty, rifles placed neatly, boots lined as if set to dry. The mess was cold. There was no scramble, only the drum. It moved through vents and between ribs. It knocked at doors as if checking for breath. We kept watches. I sat with Tomlinson under a broken floodlight. We mapped the beats on cardboard. The thudding came nearer, vanished, then rose above us. The dogs collapsed, eyes glassy. At dawn, the first man was found in the tower. He was not dead, as I knew death. His eyes had been replaced with pebbles. His mouth hung open as if mid-song. Behind him were tiny prints, spirals that led into the field. We buried him with ordered hands. We buried more than a body. We tried to leave. The road out showed a row of figures in the lane, uniforms caked with soil, faces turned away. They did not move when we honked. We backed away. The figures waited like markers. Over the next nights, men slipped away. The radio offered only that drum. Sleep became a risk. A whisper threaded vents, saying a name only my mother used. I vomited in the latrine, and the water lapped at my ankles like a hand. On the final night I stayed in the tower, Tomlinson had vanished. The drumming rose from beneath. The ground rolled as if an ocean replaced the yard. From the black wave, a form rose, shadow, then a man in a ragged uniform I recognized. The drum was his chest. The beats were a heartbeat that refused to stop. He looked up. His face was every face I had trusted. He reached, and I felt my fingers slip between his teeth, my name mouthed through a mouth that had not spoken in years. I screamed. I screamed until my voice broke. The figure smiled. The world tightened to rhythm. They helped me down. They showed Tomlinson's bandage, the one he kept like a talisman, stitched to a scrap of cloth and to the soil. "We cannot let him leave," they murmured. I felt sewing, slow, precise, like someone stitching a keepsake into flesh. Now I write with my left hand because the right feels wrong, as if it belongs elsewhere. The drum plays even when the radio is dead. Tonight they asked me to open the gate. I did. Some things once heard become a cadence you cannot escape. I keep time with them. I am on watch. The field hums through my bones. Fourth story. Whisperers at Camp Mercer. I remember the cold like a mouth closing, sharp, wet, impossible to breathe through. My name is Jacob Reynolds. I was a night watch in Camp Mercer, a place people from Dayton and the county called a training ground, but at night it felt like a seam in the world. We were supposed to be soldiers, steady boots, steady hands, but there was something that did not know how to be steady. We came home from a live exercise that smelled of diesel and burned rubber. Captain Ethan Price told us to stand 2-hour watches until dawn. Mason Cole, laughed like we were boys again and handed me his thermos. He said, "Jake, don't stare at the trees too long. They'll stare back." He always joked. He never stopped smiling. The first thing wrong was the radio. It hummed and then breathed, static that sounded like a name. I tightened the collar of my jacket and told myself stories. Foxes, wind, the old pipes under Mercer. Then the footsteps began, soft, no rhythm, skirting the edge of our lights. Mason said it was nothing. He said it with his eyes on the tree line, and I believed him until I saw the prints. They were not boot prints. They were too long, too many toes, like something that had forgotten how to walk, but remembered how to leave marks. I ran my gloved hand over the soft ground and felt cold under the soil, cold that soaked my fingers to the bone. Mason took a step toward the trees, and then he fell. He did not cry out. He only looked at me, and his mouth moved like he was trying to tell me something I could not hear. We ran. The siren on base was a thin blade of sound that woke everyone, except it did not wake the thing on the line. Ethan showed up, his face a map of commands and fear, and he ordered, "Calm. Form a sweep." We moved like ghosts in a practice drill, flashlights cutting curtains of black. Out there, the woods rearranged themselves. We found torn gear, a boot half buried, a dog tag that read Mason Cole and nothing else. The radios started talking in voices we knew. They said things only we could know. Names of lovers, the childhood towns, the whispered things we had buried beneath years of uniform pride. Mason's voice came softer than a memory, calling my name from the tree line. I answered. I should not have answered. When I called back, something answered in Mason's voice, but with the wrong rhythm, the wrong breath. It said, "Come closer." I followed the voice because I was a soldier and obedience is a terrible habit. I crossed the low fence and stepped into the black. The air went cold enough to hurt. The trees leaned in as if listening. Mason stood there, his face half wrapped in shadow, and the moon cut him into a grin I had never seen before. He smiled, and his eyes were not his. They were flat, like coins you could not change. "Jake," he said, and the syllable felt like a hand in my chest. I reached out and his skin was paper. And then he laughed. Mason's laugh, and the laugh of dozens of Masons. Every voice he had ever borrowed, stuttering like shells. I grabbed him and he fell through my arms as if he were smoke and not a man. Behind him, the trees moved in a slow, patient tide. Something shaped the darkness. It took Mason and left me with his tag between my fingers and a new sound in my ear. My own voice saying I should be quiet. We found tracks leading to the training bunker and returning, trailing only silence. We found the captain with his rifle across his chest, eyes open and looking at the ceiling like he had seen through it. There was no blood. The medics called it hypothermia, exposure, or panic. They wrapped us in blankets, and the night kept talking. I dreamt that Mason was a map of the base, his laughter plotting routes I could not remember. I woke to footage from the perimeter cameras. The camera captured a shape at the fence, tall, joining and unjoining from the trunks of the trees, drawing itself in the space between branches. At dawn, the footage stuttered, and every frame where the shape should have been filled with static, and then Mason's face appeared on the screen, smiling at me from my own angle. He lifted a hand and waved in a way he had never waved the year he joked about recruits and beers. They told me to go home. They filed reports with language that smelled of formality and then erasure. The base cleaned the earth, patched the fence, painted over the places the thing touched. They called it an incident and allowed sunlight to pretend it had solved something. At night now, when the house keys rattle in my pocket, when the TV hums like a distant radio, I hear a name that is not a name but the shape of a name. It calls across the neighborhood from the woods behind my street, and it sounds like Mason. It sounds like my mother calling me in the voice she used when I was lost as a boy. I answer sometimes. I tell myself I am testing the sound, that I still have command of my throat. The voice on the other end shapes my answer back into a grin. I looked at a photograph the other day, an old platoon picture taken before the exercises. I was standing at the center, shoulder to shoulder with men who now were only memories. In the glossy paper, my face had always been there. Now, where my shoulders should be, there was an empty gray no more substantial than breath. I held my hand over that blank and felt the photograph warm like a mouth. I woke tonight to the sound of someone at my door. The porch light painted a thin rectangle on the floor. Through the peephole, Mason stood there, clean, smiling, in the uniform he had left behind. He raised a hand, and when he lifted it, the skin of his palm looked like tree bark, and the tag around his neck read my name. I opened the door. I should not have opened the door. The thing stepped in like it belonged inside walls and names. It smelled like the training grounds in winter and the diesel smoke of burned rubber. It put its hand on my face, and the touch was cold and familiar. It looked at me with all the voices it had stolen, and then it smiled and said, "Welcome home, Jacob." I do not know how long it takes to stop being a man. I know the moment you look at a mirror and the eyes you see are not yours, when they tilt like spoons and keep no light. I know the way your mouth starts to make sounds that are only echoes. The last thing I remember before I lost Mason and the captain, and whatever the rest of us called ourselves, was my own voice, high and wrong, calling from outside the base, calling to the new man on watch. I am writing this because sometimes the thing that takes us likes to leave a record, a bait, a litmus test. Maybe you will read it and think it a story. Maybe you will see the empty place in a photograph and laugh and say someone was taken by the cold or by panic. Maybe you will hear your name in the trees and think it is a joke. But if you ever find yourself on night watch at a place called Camp Mercer, and the radio breathes your name like someone who already knows you, do not answer. Do not open the door. Fifth story, the salute that never came. They told us the night watch was the easiest shift at Camp Harlow, that it was a quiet patch of road and wire between the barracks and the ammunition dump, a place where the wind told its own stories and men slept with their helmets off. I believed them once, because belief made the cold easier to bear. My name is Ethan Cole. I was 28 when my unit rotated through Harlow, and I had already learned that fear wears many uniforms. The first sign was small, a boot print in the mud where no one should have been, a single, shallow print that led toward the tree line and then vanished. I followed it because curiosity is a poor substitute for courage, and because Sergeant Miller had already told me to check perimeter one more time. The woods smelled wrong, like metal and old sweat. I heard something breathe between the branches, and I turned, flashlight slicing the dark, but the light caught only trunks and the glint of something far away. I walked faster, heart thudding, and told myself it was just a fox or a loose hound. But then the radios died. We lost the net with a sound like someone taking a match to a lantern. One moment the chatter was there, voices chasing each other across channels. The next, silence. We fixed what we could, swore and kicked and waited, but the sky answered not at all. At midnight, Jackson from Echo Squad went out to check the perimeter and never came back. They sent a search party at once, men with torches and soft curses, and we found his rifle leaning against a stump. No sign of him. No footprints leading away, only a smear of blood like a thumbprint on the bark. People start to change in small ways when their names stop meaning anything. Miller stopped sleeping entirely. He walked the compound like a machine learning the edges of its own fear. We made watch rotations tighter, locked doors that had never been locked, and I kept seeing shapes at the edge of lights, figures that matched no human outline. One night I heard a voice call my name from the latrines. Clear, low, like a man struggling through a throat full of gravel. And I answered, because you answer when a voice calls you on a dark road. It replied with my mother's lullaby, but sung wrong. The notes last and hollow. We tried to leave. Trucks were lined at the gate, engines warm, men climbing in like birds into a storm, but the gate would not open. The latch groaned as if holding back the sea, and the sentry swore he saw hands from the other side. Thin, pale fingers pressing at the bars. We put our shoulders to the steel and pushed until our rib cages burned. Still the gate stayed shut. That was when the lights in the barracks died, one by one, like someone snuffing candles in a chapel. We stood in the dark and counted breaths. We were an army built of numbers and names, and the dark was erasing both. On the third night, no, I will not say which night, because the nights at Harlow blurred into mouths, I walked to the parade ground and found the muster line empty except for a single perfect boot standing at attention. The boot held no foot. It faced the flagpole as if saluting something unseen. I stepped closer and the grass whispered against my boots, and then a voice, Miller's voice, came from behind me, saluting, saying the old words we say when a man is gone. I turned so fast I tasted metal, and there were men, so many of them, lined up in the dark, faces pale and torn at the edges like paper left in rain. They moved with the rhythm of cadences we had trained into muscle and bone, and they looked at me as if expecting answers. One of them raised a hand. It was Jackson, but his eyes were empty, his mouth working around a smile that knew a joke I did not. He lifted his palm in the old, proper salute we all learned at boot camp, and I thought, he would lower it for me and laugh and break the spell. Instead, the salute held and lengthened, and every head in the line turned to look at me. They were waiting for my response. I snapped to attention, because muscle remembers what will into it. I returned the salute because habit is louder than sense. The salute never ended. Their palms pressed into mine with a cold that was not winter, and the ground under our boots gave way like rotten wood. I heard the earth swallow 100 names. I only had time to think of my mother humming in the kitchen, of the way sunlight looks on river water in June, before the dark took me whole. You will not find our names on the roster now. They crossed them out in ink that bleeds. Camp Harlow stands still behind the wire, quiet as a held breath. Sometimes patrols find boots in the mud, perfect, clean, waiting. If you pass the gate when the wind goes wrong and the radios go mute, do not answer the voice that calls your name. Do not return a salute that never ends, because when the army comes to call you home, it will keep the salute for itself.